40 days until Election Day. Joe Biden's ground game is coming to questions by some Democrats and is simply not a priority for them. According to Axios, with more than 3 trips to more than a dozen states and nearly 1.5 million door knocks, the Trump-Pence ticket is all in on the ground game. But is that $48 million a week price tag sustainable? So here to talk more about that, Senior Advisor for Strategy for Trump 2020, Steve Cortes himself. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
You bet, Sagar. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So, Steve, tell us about that. Why go in all on the ground game? The Biden campaign has largely decided they're going to wage this war on the airwaves, and judging by all their polling, it seems to be working out. And I've seen some reports that in the middle of a pandemic, many people don't want people coming to their door. So, is this working out for your campaign?
We think it is. And by the way, regarding polling, when we look at battleground states, we see that those polls, public polls, have tightened dramatically, which largely reflects what we see at the campaign in our private polling. Brand new poll out today from ABC, which shows the state of Florida and Arizona both essentially tied, show us up dramatically on the number one most important issue to most voters, which is the economy. So I would argue it is working where it needs to work in the battleground states. But I'd also say this, I think that the Biden campaign believes that they can run a sort of pre-digital age campaign. They believe that by spending a ton of money on traditional TV advertising, by doing very little travel, by facing the press sparingly at best, that they can win this election. I think they think that they can sort of stumble across the finish line and win by default. And we just don't view it that way. We think we have to go out, hustle, grind, earn the votes of the American people, and in large part doing it by traveling. And we know that we can do it safely. We know we can have events that are outside, that meet protocols, that are safe, and that energize the American people. So I would argue so far, particularly in battleground states, our strategy is working. The race is tightening. But I'll also be the first to concede, Sagar, I think from here in a lot of these states, it's essentially a jump ball. From here forward, we've got 6 weeks to go.
So, okay, 6 weeks, jump ball. This is when we really learn from you guys what you're actually interested in. From what I can see, all in on Pennsylvania. So talk to me about that. With the economy in particular, what is that core message on the economy? Because we had seen last time around a much more trade-focused message that was going after Hillary Clinton. I haven't heard as much of that coming from the president against Joe Biden in some of his more recent speeches.
Sure. Well, regarding Pennsylvania specifically, but I think that this is emblematic of what we are going to do nationally and in all of the battleground states, certainly. The economy, again, is our number one priority. We know that it's the number one priority of the voters, for one thing. But right. Number two, I think it's where we have the best case to make to the American people of why President Trump should be effectively rehired as this nation's CEO. And what I mean by that is I would give two examples. Number one, we have the historical example of what we did during the first 3 years of the Trump administration. This president created the conditions for absolutely unbelievable growth. And the numbers all prove that. We recently, last week, got out census data for the full year 2019, the last pre-pandemic year. And we know that 2019 saw the largest income growth for working Americans ever in American history. Amazing 6.8% wage growth. The Biden-Obama administration, by contrast, never had a single year of 3% or better growth. But we don't just want to talk about the past. We also want to talk about the present and what it portends for the future. And when we look at the economy right now, today, we see an economic renaissance that's absolutely booming in this country. All know we still have work to do to reclaim the heights of the Trump boom that we were enjoying as recently as the early parts of this year. But the great news is that the economic trajectory of this country is accelerating higher. There is a surge of optimism out there. All the recent metrics show us that. For example, manufacturing wages, something key to a state like Pennsylvania, manufacturing wages just hit a new all-time high in the month of August. And we're also going to make the case in places like Pennsylvania that the quickest way to smash this burgeoning economic revival in our country would be to elect Joe Biden, because he'll do a couple of things. Number one, he'll inflict the largest tax hike in American history, $4 trillion of punishing new levies, twice as big as anything even Hillary Clinton proposed, that will affect 82% of American workers. And secondly, particularly important for a state like Pennsylvania, he absolutely threatens the American energy sector. He's been all over the map about what he actually believes on fracking. And he's trying to have it both ways. He's trying to please radical environmentalists while also trying to reassure.
So I think this is where it gets interesting, Steve. What I just heard from you is fundamentally like an optimistic message, and yet Pew polling shows 14% of Americans agree with the wrong track, that America is on the right track. Only 14% agree with that statement. Historically, highly correlated with an incumbent president's defeat. How do you square that with your message there? Well, how is that congruous at all?
No, listen, Sagar, I'm very aware of those trends, and it's unfortunately not surprising given what our country has gone through. This is such an unusual year, right, in so many ways. And because of the China virus, there is a sour mood out there. And look, I'll be the first to concede that. It's not Donald Trump's fault. It's not Joe Biden's fault. It's not any American's fault. The only people who are complicit are the Chinese Communist Party. But to tie that issue back into the election, who is the candidate who can take on the existential challenge that the Chinese Communist Party presents to our national and economic security and even to our health? I think we have a strong case to make that it is Donald Trump, the first American leader who has truly stood up to Beijing. And in Joe Biden, we see exactly the opposite. Someone who has coddled and appeased the CCP for decades, somebody who has sent American jobs all over the world during his half century in the Washington swamp, but particularly to China. So I will concede to you that the mood right now in the country is a problem. But I would also say this, the economic momentum is taking off to such a degree that I think that the consumer and national mood is starting to follow. But clearly, we have work to do on that score. We need to convince and persuade the American people that this renaissance is real, because it is, that it's happening, and that there are reasons to be optimistic. And that, by the way, re-electing President Trump is one of the ways to make certain that the CCP cannot harm this country again.
Well, there's the case right there. 6 more weeks to go. Appreciate you joining us, Steve. Thanks for joining me.
You bet. Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.